And I heard this sound and I was like, what is this sound?
The Stapletons are a husband and wife harp and guitar duo. Together, they write baroque folk, rich with hints of Appalachian balladry, Delta blues, and echoes of the English folk revival movement. Blues-driven harp and guitar arrangements, topped by ethereal vocal harmonies, combine to create a wondrous sound. The Stapletons will be at the Saginaw Art Museum on July 11th as part of the Museum Tunes concert series. For more information about the concert, visit saginawartmuseum.org. Okay, and Casey, you are the Stapletons. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. We are looking forward to hosting you at the Saginaw Art Museum in just a little while. But appreciate you coming on here to chat a little bit more about the music that you're making and the way that you're making that music. So I'd love to hear a little bit of the story of the way that your musical journeys have started to have intersected here. You both are musicians in your own right. Kate, you're on the harp, and Casey, I know that you play guitar. But you both were playing instruments before you were playing them together, if I understand the story correctly. And I'd love to hear more about the individual journey and how it's brought you together.
Sure. Thanks for having us. We're so excited to talk to you today and to be coming to play in Saginaw. We do come from totally different worlds musically. We grew up on opposite sides of the continent in dairy farming country, and Casey grew up in LA. So it was a totally different universe in LA, and we experienced different things musically too, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't get into guitar playing until I was in like 7th grade. And my mom, who is from Mexico, and I stopped after about a month. And then after that, I was listening to some REM, and I really wanted to learn like Losing My Religion. And so that's what brought me back into guitar playing. And so, but I wasn't allowed to have an electric guitar until I was like a junior in high school. My dad wouldn't let me. So eventually I got one.
Which is kind of interesting because Casey's dad actually went to school with the Grateful Dead and what's the other band?
Oh, Lindsey Buckingham.
Yeah, and Lindsey Buckingham. So he had this belief that if you started playing guitar, you would become a crazed drug addict, which in his experience was completely true in high school. So
yeah,
he said no electric guitar.
Right.
But acoustic was okay.
Acoustic was okay.
But
yeah.
you only had like a classical guitar from your Mexican uncle, right?
Yeah, I started off playing on a classical guitar from my Mexican uncle, Tio Mario, and he's a lawyer in Mazatlan, Mexico. And one of his clients couldn't afford the attorney fees, and so instead he built him a guitar because he was a guitar maker. So I still have that guitar. It's a really beautiful classical guitar, but yeah, it was a barter in exchange for a man's, I guess, like freedom or debt relief or something.
But you started playing the blues on this acoustic classical Mexican guitar.
Yeah, it wasn't super fun, but it's all I was allowed to have. So yeah.
It's interesting to hear the way that you've, you started with what you had and you just took it from there, rather than chuck it out the window and say, I'm not doing anything. You used it to your advantage in some respect.
Yeah, I got out of it as I could until, my dad finally bent the knee and let me get an electric guitar. So.
And then you ended up at blues jams, right? When you were pretty young, you were experiencing like Los Angeles blues jams.
Yeah. And during high school, I would try to make it a point to go to blues jams, just to get better at playing and work on skills and stuff. So that was really cool. That was a very experience of going to blues jams and just being really outclassed from studio musicians who would go there and just goof around on a Sunday afternoon. So, and I learned from them.
So when we met, Casey was super excited about the blues. It came from a totally different musical tradition. I grew up on a farm in the middle of farming country. My mother's family was all sort of church choir directors and very much gather around the piano and sing real folk songs from the 20s. And I listened to a ton of folk music growing up. My family attended folk music festivals every year. And so I was sort of steeped in you really get a special northern tradition, I think, up in Wisconsin. I mean, it's so close to Canada. We listen to a ton of Canadian musicians, a lot of really great storytelling. So I was really influenced by that. I studied piano growing up, but I didn't start to play the harp until I was in high school. I walked into a room and I heard this sound and I was like, what is this sound? And this woman was playing a Celtic harp, so a 5-octave Celtic harp, 12-string guitar at the same time, which I've never heard anyone else do. And I just was totally captured by it. And I decided that I wanted to learn how to play the harp. So with my first paycheck from my first job, I went out and bought a tiny 3-octave harp that was actually made by a guy who was 90 years old when he started making harps. He was a violin maker, and when he would turn 90, he decided he wanted to try making harps. And I bought the first small harp he had ever made. And then I ended up a few years later buying the 5-octave Irish harp that he made. They were great instruments, a little wonky, not because he was 90, but because he had never made one before. But it was something that sounded so extraordinary to me that it was something that I was really drawn to. So I kind of came at it from a really basic. I bought a book called Teach Yourself to Play the and I started with really simple folk music. And then I moved to North Carolina. And in North Carolina, I was living in the Piedmont and then in the mountains. So was living in a world that was totally steeped in this living bluegrass tradition, which I didn't actually directly participate in, but it was so amazing to kind of be there and experience that. And while I was there, I studied classical harp technique. So I came from a really folksy and classical influenced world. So when we first met, I think we were really intrigued by the fact that we both played instruments, but they two separate universes. So we never even imagined playing together.
I think it's interesting too, sort of both of you commented on the origin of your instruments and the way that plays into the story of your learning them and playing them. And so it's almost like this connection between the instruments and the music that you're making connects the dots a little bit there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they were limited, but it was also really expansive because you knew that you were sort of touching someone else's dream, and then that allowed us to launch our own.
Along that lines, in terms of making music together, you seem to be drawing from some traditional stories and storytelling. Can you comment a little bit more about some of the reasons why you're drawn to some of that more traditional storytelling in the music that you make?
So when we were first preparing to get married, we knew that each other played instruments. And Casey was actually so excited about playing the guitar that I was in North Carolina, he was in Pittsburgh, and he told me that every night he would sleep with his guitar. I thought it was super charming and romantic. I also thought that after we got married, he should definitely take the guitar and put it away, which he did. We got married, he put the guitar away and did not play a single note of music for 6 years, like not one note. But a friend of ours who was a musician and really pursued that sound. Casey has a 12-string guitar. He wanted to work with the 12-string and the acoustic and the harp. And it suddenly an echo of that sound that had initially drawn me into playing the harp in the first place. That, was when I was an early teenager, the sound of the 12-string guitar and the harp together, which is just an unusual collaboration. And so we were just sort of playing with the sound and kind of trying to it wasn't a collaboration that we expected. And such disparate elements in our playing that writing original music and pulling out some of the traditional music together sort of seemed to make sense.
Uh, it's brought us closer together. Um, because a lot of like we wanted to make music in such a way that it worked well for our family. Like we have small kids and we can't be out on weeknights at, like playing shows at midnight at bars and stuff, So the music we do make, I think I don't want to say family friendly. I mean it is family friendly, but it's conducive to our family life and it's been good for our relationship. So I'm happy how it's turned out.
Yeah, I remember when we were initially dating, Casey told me that he had this vision of going on the road and touring as a musician, and taking his family with him. And I was sort of trying, like, imagining him playing blues gigs. Um, but part of the projects that we've done have allowed us to play, festivals and libraries and museums and settings that, when we started writing, we wanted to write about our own life and our marriage and ourselves, but we also wanted to write about the world we're staying in and sort of examine it more deeply from a historical perspective. And so we've continued to do projects that have melded the personal and the historical, I think, in that way.
And you're working on a project now in this current tour. Can you describe a little bit more about this catalog of songs that you're playing and sort of what brought these Great Lakes songs to the forefront of your current project?
Began, we were interested in sea songs, I think. So he grew up sailing and traveling a lot around the world, right? I think you always had a connection with him.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so songs, I mean, there's like pirate sea shanties on one end, and then you have like Great Lake songs, which are a little different. And so I think they're really cool because they're very localized, involving the land. I'm not super familiar with the Great Lakes. It's helped me. It's kind of awakened me to the beauty of the United States. There's a lot of neat parts of the country, and Kate does a great job of reading up about the history of the lakes, of the people who lived and worked there, and so we try to work that into our songs.
Yeah, I grew up on my dad grew up on the Great Lakes, so I grew up going to Lake Michigan every year. And we a couple years ago we bought a 40-foot school bus and started touring in that. And after we converted the school bus so that we could had bunk beds for the kids and that we could travel in and carry our instruments. We also realized that it wasn't really great at going over hills at all. So we looked at a map of the United States. And we realized that we could sort of travel a massive amount around the coast of the Great Lakes without ever cresting any insane mountains in the process because they've been flattened out by the lake. So it was a geographically appealing area. The ecological importance of the lakes and the elements that they played in the initial discovery of the continent by the Europeans. It was so early on. I mean, the 1600s, those lakes were so important to the French explorers and the history of our country, and also the native population and the copper that's up in Lake Superior. And there's an incredible wealth of information about the Great Lakes that has been super inspiring for songwriting and for collecting these really beautiful songs that were used on the lakes during the sailing era there.
It's fantastic to always learn sort of how songs and artists approach the craft. And so I really appreciate you sharing a little bit of your story with us today. And we'll look forward to hearing your music here at the Saginaw Art Museum in July.
Thanks so much. We're really excited to play.
Yeah, we can't wait.
Thank you for listening to the Temple Arts Podcast. Please consider subscribing to the podcast and making a donation to the arts through SaginawArtMuseum.org or TempleTheater.com. This will allow us to continue to bring enriching program to Saginaw and beyond.